this lesson on consistency, predictability, and immediacy, the 3 pillars to healthy parenting. Now, in previous lessons, I have expressed the importance of consistency, whether it is consistency in how you yourself responds to your child, or consistency between how you and your spouse responds to your child. Either way, the first key of successful parenting is making sure that the rules are the rules and the expectations are the expectations. You will find nothing but frustration if you occasionally allow your child to break the rules, and then other times try to punish him for breaking those same rules. This fact is based on psychological research. Let's consider the classic example of a casino slot machine. People sit at those slot machines for hours upon hours, feeding coins in one after the other, with the hopes that the next pull of the lever, the lights will flash and the alarms will sound, indicating that he or she has won. What keeps that person there for so long? They certainly do not win every time. In fact, they lose more times than not. What keeps them there is what we refer to as an intermittent reinforcement schedule. I know, sounds fancy, but what it means is that psychologically, the player knows that eventually he will get what he wants. Eventually, their efforts will pay off. If there's never a chance of winning, no one would play those machines. But because there's a chance, albeit a pretty small chance, some people will spend hours sitting at the machine waiting for their payday. And when we apply this to child behavior and parent management, we see the same thing. And perhaps we should use another classic example to illustrate. Many parents have a rule that restricts open drinks from carpeted rooms of the house. It is a rule that makes sense, but it often frustrates children. In many homes, for example, the television is in a carpeted room. As a result, kids want to bring their drinks into the living room while watching TV. But if you are a parent in that situation, you don't want them to take their drink in there because if they spill it on the carpet, obviously that's going to create problems. Parents in these situations often have to redirect their child repeatedly to have this rule followed consistently. However, if there are times when you allow your child to drink in the living room, if there are times, whatever the circumstances may be, when the rule can be broken, you are making it infinitely more difficult for your child, especially the ADHD child, to internalize that rule. Just as the gambler will continue to pull the arm of the slot machine hoping the next pull wins, the child will continue taking the open container in the living room hoping that this was one of those times when it's going to be okay and he's going to be allowed to do so. So the first aspect of this lesson is this: don't make a rule unless it is really a rule. Consistency means that a rule or expectation today will be a rule or expectation tomorrow. Moreover, it means that a rule or expectation with mom is a rule or expectation with dad. Although this is true for all children, it is especially critical for children with ADHD who already have a difficult time considering consequences before they act. They will need rules and expectations reinforced dozens, if not hundreds, and if you ask some parents, even thousands of times before it becomes an internal part of their behavior. Medication may help with the learning curve, but it will still take consistent repetition for the child to gain the skills. And every time that you waver, every time the rule or expectation can be broken, you are adding time and frustration to the child's learning. So what does this mean for you today? It is critical that you and any other caregiver, which could be your spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, grandparents, significant other of some sort, anything, you and the other caregivers need to sit down and decide what your core set of rules and expectations are going to be. You must agree on them, and you must agree that these rules and expectations are absolute. Now, if you think about that for a moment, what I'm suggesting to you is very restrictive. It means don't make a rule that you can't enforce 100% of the time. One rule parents often attempt to make is to restrict the child from eating in his bedroom. The rule says, no food in the bedroom. However, the next time he's sick, you will take him into his room, tuck him into bed, and lovingly bring him some food to eat so that he doesn't have to get out of bed and strain to get into the kitchen. Obviously, there's a situation where that rule is broken. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't bring your sick child food in bed. What I'm saying is, perhaps eating in your room shouldn't be a rule. So, as such, you got it. don't make that a rule. While on the surface, the act of developing rules and expectations may sound easy, as soon as we talk about the importance of consistency, many of the things that we originally considered as rules will have to be taken off the list. As such, this process takes a little bit more time and energy than the willy-nilly way many parents tend to come up with rules. So here are a few rules we like, as they are examples that are simple, absolute, and typically meaningful. Rule number 1, be respectful of others. There is never a time when it is okay to be mean or disrespectful of anyone. This rule applies to the child as well as the parent. There is never a reason for a child to be disrespectful to their parent, and there's never a reason for the parent to be disrespectful to the child. Rule number 2, hands are for helping, not hurting. There is never a time when it is okay to hit, kick, or otherwise strike someone else. While we will spend time later on talking about spanking in another lesson, this rule should also be applied to the child as well as the parent. There is no time when it is okay to hit. So, hands are for helping, not hurting, is a general rule that can be absolute and always enforced. Rule number 3, when there is a conflict, we talk about it. This rule, when used appropriately, can be very powerful as you build your relationship with your child. What this rule says is that when we have a disagreement, when there is a conflict, I will not automatically assume I'm right, and you do not automatically assume that you're right. We will talk about it and make sure we both understand, and then we will make a decision. This rule helps your child develop critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills. Rule number 4, when we are angry, we will take a time out. It is never advisable to respond to situations out of anger. When we do so, we typically respond in a more excessive and punitive manner. As such, this rule ensures that you take time to weigh your response or frustration, and that you teach your child through modeling to do the same thing. Rule 5, always try your best. Again, the key here is that no matter what we're doing, we always put forth our best effort. Whether you're talking about academics, athletics, or behaviors in general, we always do the best we can to meet the expectations set before us. And that's really it, those 5 rules. You really should never have more than 5 rules. And in fact, even with teachers at school, it's never advisable to have more than 3 to 5 rules. Moreover, an underlying requirement of each of these rules is that what applies to the child also applies to the parents. As I mentioned in previous lessons, children do what has been modeled for them. So when a parent lashes out due to anger, the child will as well. If you set rules, as I have described above, then parents should verbalize what they are doing when they are applying those rules. For example, if you're getting angry, you should say in a very direct and out loud way, "Man, I'm really getting angry right now. So I'm going to take a quick time out so I can calm down, and then I'll come back and try to fix the problem later." When you say this out loud and your child hears it, the child, with repeated exposure, will begin to internalize that speech and begin to make it their own. This is yet another reason why it is so important to begin this process early in development. That said, it will also work with older children as well. It just may take a little bit more time. Now, I'm going to give you a quick example from my life of where I use this, and hopefully you'll be able to see how it can be effective. I feel like I am pretty good at a number of things, but one thing I'm not very good at is working on machines and motors and things like that. And one day, my lawnmower wasn't working very well. And so I thought that I would take my son out and we would try to work on it. We began to take it apart. And as I'm taking it apart, because I really had no idea what I'm doing, I'm starting to get frustrated. And so at one point I finally say, "I'm getting really frustrated with this. I'm going to stop. Let's go do something else, and then we'll come back and work on this later." I said it out loud, and that was really all that I said. My son and I, we went out and we did some other things, and then we came back to the lawnmower later, put the parts back on, and decided that we needed to get somebody with more experience to work on it. A few days later, I noticed that my son was working on something, and he was obviously getting frustrated, and he said almost exactly the same words out loud that I had said a few days before. He said, man, I'm really getting frustrated with this. I'm going to go play another game and then I'll come back and try this later. Now, I didn't tell him this is how you deal with anger. What I did was I taught him that this is how I deal with anger. And I taught him that in a very direct and concrete way. So again, when we verbalize the things that we're thinking, when we verbalize how we're applying some of these rules to our life, when we do it out loud in the presence of our children, many times they will take those same lessons and begin to apply it to themselves. Now, the second aspect of this lesson is this. If you say it, you gotta do it. This is predictability. We have all heard parents who make outlandish threats. I was in the store the other day, and I heard a mother tell her son that he would be grounded for the rest of his life if he did not stop asking for a candy bar. The rest of his life, really. So if we take that at face value, which most children, especially children with ADHD, who are more concrete type thinkers when they're younger, the rest of your life, you're going to be grounded. At times, when parents make these outrageous threats, they're typically in desperate types of situations. They really want to change the child's behavior immediately. And given what I've talked about in previous lessons, this should make sense. Combining most parents' desire to do something about the behavior and their need for that something to be a punishment, parents will often go to unreasonable lengths to identify a punishment that will begin to change the child's behavior immediately. In the previous lesson, I spoke about the problem of the behavioral techniques. The tendency to make extreme threats is a perfect manifestation of that problem. You can't apply those types of consequences consistently, and you can't apply them in all situations. Now, I hope that these parents have no real intent to implement the threats they've made. In fact, given the absence of significant change in the child's behavior, I would assume that the child is aware that the threat is pretty empty. Again, the child the other day at the grocery store, despite mom threatening with lifelong grounding, he didn't stop. He continued to ask for the candy bar. So this is where predictability comes into play. If you say that you are going to do something, do it. If not, don't say it. Children very quickly learn what is and what is not a real threat. Plain and simple, they know. For your parenting to be effective, you must say what you mean and mean what you say. If you tell your child that behavior X will result in consequence Y, then by all means, consequence Y better be a reality. This goes for consequences to stop bad behaviors, as well as consequences to maintain good behaviors. For example, don't tell your child that you will take him to Disney if he passes his spelling test on Friday, unless you plan to buy those tickets. What's more, the technicality of, well, I didn't say when we would go, will only work once or twice. If you want your positive or negative consequences to be effective, you have to follow through. As was the case with consistency, this results in the need for a plan. You can't wing it. Not with assigning consequences for your child's behavior. You have to have a plan. You must consider what consequences you are comfortable assigning before you are in need of them. For example, when you go to the grocery store, you know your child well enough to expect whether or not he will ask for candy. So be prepared for it. How will you handle it? Will you let him buy it with the expectation that he will save it for dessert? Or will you tell him no, that he has had enough candy already and doesn't need any more? Either way, you have to be prepared for his reaction. And again, you know your child better than anyone else, so you have to make sure that the consequence you use makes sense. In this situation, for example, it would not make sense to tell him that if he doesn't stop asking for the candy bar, that he will not be able to ride his bike when he gets home. What does riding his bike have to do with begging for a candy bar? Conversely, you could tell him that if he doesn't stop asking you for the candy bar, you'll put back his sugary Pop-Tarts or ice cream or whatever other treat you got for him. That would make much more intuitive sense because it's something that can be applied right now. And for most children, that is what is needed. When you plan, you are much more likely to assign consequences that are logical and realistic. Nonetheless, what you say, you need to do. So if you tell him to stop asking for the candy bar or else you will put back his ice cream, even if you want the ice cream, you got to put it back if the behavior doesn't stop. This predictability, of course, works both ways. On one hand, the child will learn to stop bad behaviors to avoid threatened consequences that he knows will happen. On the other hand, he will learn that if you promise a positive consequence for good behavior, you will follow through as well. So this is a win-win, though it is only possible through predictability. And predictability is only possible through doing what you say you are going to do. Now, the third aspect of this lesson is this: don't wait, do it now. Another problematic aspect of the behavioral treatments is the fact that consequences cannot be implemented immediately. To use a previous example, if the rule for talking back is the removal of video game privileges, what happens when he talks back to you when you're in the car or at a store? The consequence will have to be delivered through a reminder up to hours later when you get home. In fact, the child is likely to not even remember what you're talking about. In addition to you having to remember the situation, you will likely have to remind him. Remember, a few hours ago at Walmart, when you talked back to me, you wanted something and I told you no? You don't remember that? Well, anyways, no video games for the rest of the day. As you can imagine, it's not going to be a very effective consequence. It's not going to be very likely to change his behavior next time you're at Walmart. So the third part of this lesson focuses on immediacy. As parents, especially parents of younger children and parents of children with ADHD, it is critical that we identify ways to respond to behavior immediately, not angrily, but immediately. As I said earlier, we certainly do not want to apply consequences impulsively out of anger. And the planning that we've already discussed will help with that. However, although we're going to plan, we can't wait too long, as the association between the consequence and behavior will diminish. And when there is no relationship between the consequence and behavior, the consequence has no effectiveness in changing the behavior that we're looking to change. Another quick but way too common example is when children come home from school with a note in their agenda that they got in trouble today. It doesn't really matter what they got in trouble for, of course within reason. Of course, we're not talking about fighting or anything that could be leading to suspensions or anything like that. But let's say that he got in trouble for being out of his seat. So instead of a green face in his agenda, he comes home with a yellow face, meaning he had a warning. Many parents have an unwritten rule that if you get in trouble in school, you lose privileges at home. While I certainly do not condone or mean to suggest that children who get in trouble at school should be allowed to do whatever he wants to do when he gets home, I will say that consequences applied at home have relatively little effect on behavior at school. Let's say that he was out of his seat first thing in the morning, around 8:30. By the time everyone gets home, when you look in his agenda, it could be 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the evening. That's 9 hours later. As smart as your child may be, he is not going to make that connection without your help, let alone remember to stay in his seat the next morning at 8:30. As a result, I'm not a huge proponent of punishing kids at home for behaviors at school. I recognize that that is not a common stance, but there is too much evidence that highlights its ineffectiveness. After all, many kids who get behavior marks in their agenda on one day and are punished for those behaviors continue to get behavior marks in their agenda the following days. Parents tell me time and time again stories like, he has not played video games after school for weeks because he keeps getting in trouble at school. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the consequence is not very effective in changing his behavior. We need a new plan, likely one that occurs at school when it is needed. What this means for you as the parent is that when you are doing your planning, all that stuff that we've already talked about, you need to take into account the viability of immediacy. Is your response to behavior X going to happen soon enough to be meaningful? The timing has to be taken into account. And like the case of predictability, immediacy is important for positive and negative behaviors. Many parents will tell their child, if you are good for the entire week, I will take you to get ice cream on Sunday. Well, sorry to say, but for many children, 5 days is an eternity. That is way too far in the future to influence their behavior today. Sunday might as well be Christmas. It's just too far into the future to really impact their behavior on Monday. By knowing your child, you have to know their appreciation of time. Many children, especially those with ADHD, need at least daily reminders of consequences and the expectations that you have for them, both positive and negative ones. Some even need them multiple times a day. You have to tailor it to your child. Now, I am not suggesting that you get him ice cream every day, let alone a reward multiple times a day. In fact, I really recommend against that. I don't think that you should be getting your child anything on a daily basis. Instead, for example, some parents will use sticker charts to address this conundrum. Here's how that works for both short and long-term goals. When you decide that you want to use this strategy, especially when you have a younger child, say 6, 7, 8 years old, it would be great to have an arts and crafts day with your child. As part of your arts and crafts activities, create a chart that has rows labeled with the behaviors that you want to exhibit, like having a green face in his agenda, making his bed, brushing his teeth, being respectful, whatever you want. Lots of rows with different expectations. You could also, instead of making it many different specific behaviors, you could just make a row for each of the rules that we've already talked about. Anyways, whatever you choose, make your rows with those labels. Next, you make columns representing the days of the week. You can decorate it, you can make it personable to your child so that he or she is enjoying it and enjoys the activity. As your child gets older, you can switch from week-long charts to month-long charts. So you can, again, tailor it based upon the age of your child. Once the chart is complete, it should be posted on the fridge or somewhere easily seen by everyone on a daily basis. Now, for each day, the child can get a sticker for each goal that he meets. So if he gets a green face at school and brushes his teeth but forgets to make his bed, he'll get 2 stickers for that day to put in the square associated with that day and those behaviors. Putting the stickers on the chart is a reward in and of itself. Nothing else is really needed, but this simple act serves as the short-term goal for your child. It serves as the short-term reminder of the expectations. The final part of the process has to do with the end of the week. If the child receives a certain number of stickers, he gets the reward, such as the ice cream on the weekend. Avoid the trap of expecting perfection, because if he messes up on one thing on Monday, then there's no reason to really work to be good the rest of the week. So build in that flexibility, even if that means having a quote-unquote bonus row, where a sticker can be earned for doing something else outstanding, like taking the trash out without being asked. So if there are, for example, 15 possibilities for stickers throughout the week, 3 behaviors, 5 days a week type of thing, then you should set the expectation at around 10, say. If he gets 10 stickers, then he gets the ice cream over the weekend. Again, it's posted where he can see it on a daily basis. It's posted in a way that he can count how many he has and how many he still needs. And you can even tailor it to be more specific based upon your own needs. So if he has 10 stickers, he gets 1 reward. If he has 13 stickers, he gets another reward, and so on. So you can adjust this to suit your family and your child. But the point is that this type of system allows you to have both short and long-term goals without relying on the child to remember the expectations without cues. For troubling behaviors, the same holds true. I gave some examples earlier, but I should reiterate that you must plan a way to ensure that you can respond to negative behaviors immediately and appropriately. It will take planning, it will take collaboration with your partners, and it may even take collaboration with your child. Nonetheless, when you plan, you are much more likely to succeed. Alright, so in this lesson, you learned the 3 major tenets of parenting strategies. You have to be consistent, the rules are the rules. You have to be predictable. If you say it will happen, it has to happen. And your response needs to be immediately. Don't try to apply consequences well after the behavior and hope that your child will figure it out, even if you verbally connect the 2 yourself. It just is not likely to happen. If you take your time and plan well, you will be able to set up a solid structure of expectations in your home. From there, all of the strategies and the subsequent lessons for this course will work much more smoothly. Therefore, your understanding and use of these perspectives, these 3 tenets, is assumed throughout the remaining lessons of this course. So go back, review Use the chat forum and message boards here to ensure that you set up a basic structure before you move on to the next lesson. All right? Again, post if you have any questions, comments, or if you found anything in particular that worked for you that you'd like to share with others. Thanks, and I'll see you at the next lesson.